All right, welcome to The Explainer. Now today, we're not telling you a horror story. Instead, we're going to unravel a fascinating medical puzzle that starts with something so common. Millions of us have one, a simple piercing. Okay, let's dive in.
So, what could your piercing really be hiding? That's the question at the very heart of what we're talking about today. Because, as you're about to see, the answer can be way more complex and surprising than you'd ever imagine.
Our story kicks off with a 23-year-old patient, and she's perfectly healthy. But something strange was happening. Mysterious lesions started appearing on her ears. They didn't hurt, they didn't itch, but they were there, these firm, purplish-red bumps. And the biggest mystery? Nobody had a clue why. Let's map out the timeline here just to get a grip on the case. So the piercings were done 5 years before the problem started. The lesions themselves only appeared 4 years later, right at the piercing sites. The initial suspicion was something serious, an internal disease. But here's the real turning point. The truth only came out 2 years after that, when a new clue turned the whole investigation on its head. The first stop for the doctors in this investigation was a serious and, let's be honest, complicated-sounding disease, sarcoidosis. And you know what? They had some pretty good reasons to think that was it.
To really get why the doctors were suspicious, we need to talk about something called a sarcoid granuloma. It sounds complicated, but it's basically your immune system overreacting and building these little knots of cells. That wall analogy is perfect. Your body is building a defensive wall, it's just building it in the wrong place. And here it is, the first big piece of evidence. The doctors did a biopsy on one of the lesions on her ear, and under the microscope, they found those exact sarcoid granulomas. With that proof in hand, everything seemed to be pointing straight to a diagnosis of sarcoidosis, a disease known for causing these granulomas all over the body.
And there was another clue. A blood test measured a marker called ACE. The result came back at 60, just a little bit above the reference range, which goes up to 52. Now, by itself, that little elevation doesn't say much, but in the context of this case, it was one more piece that seemed to fit perfectly into the sarcoidosis puzzle. But this is where the mystery really deepens. See, sarcoidosis is typically a systemic disease. It affects organs like your lungs and your eyes. But all of the patient's tests, a CT scan of her chest, an eye exam, they all came back completely normal. So the crucial question was this: how could it possibly be sarcoidosis if the disease was only showing up on her skin and only right where the piercings were? The diagnosis just wasn't adding up. With the whole systemic sarcoidosis theory getting weaker, the investigation needed a complete 180-degree turn. What if the answer wasn't inside the patient's body at all, but was actually something that had been in contact with it? This was the question that changed everything. What if those granulomas weren't a sign of some internal disease, but a really, really unusual allergic reaction to an external trigger? A reaction that was perfectly mimicking sarcoidosis. So the doctors were left with two possibilities. On one side, sarcoidosis, this mysterious disease that comes from inside the body. On the other side, an allergic reaction that looks just like sarcoidosis, but is caused by something that touched the skin. The biopsy result might look identical, but the source of the problem is completely different. To test this new theory, the doctors performed a contact test, also known as a patch test. It's basically like doing detective work on the skin. They applied these tiny samples of different metals to the patient's back, covered everything up, and then just waited to see if any of them would trigger a reaction and reveal the true culprit. After years of uncertainty, the answer was finally about to be revealed, and it was, in fact, surprising and totally definitive.
And there it is. The result of the contact test left no doubt. This wasn't a mild reaction. It was a strongly positive reaction, shown by those 3+ signs. The patient's skin was practically screaming that it had found its enemy.
And there were two culprits, palladium and nickel, two metals commonly used in jewelry. The patient had a severe hypersensitivity to both of them. The mystery of the lesions on her ears wasn't an internal disease at all, but an allergic reaction to the metals in the piercings she had worn years earlier. Now, most of us have heard of a nickel allergy. But what about palladium? Well, it's a metal in the platinum group, and it's often used as a supposedly hypoallergenic alternative to nickel in jewelry, including white gold. So here's the key takeaway.
Even when you're trying to avoid a known allergen, you might end up being exposed to another one that's rarer, but just as potent.
And just like that, the puzzle was solved. After 2 years of follow-ups and uncertainty, the final diagnosis was clear. It wasn't the feared sarcoidosis. It was an extremely rare form of contact dermatitis where the allergy to the metals showed up in a way that fooled everyone by mimicking a completely different disease. Every great medical mystery leaves us with important lessons. So let's take a look at what we can learn from this incredible case.
So, what are the lessons here? Well, the most important one is that looks can be deceiving. A biopsy that looks like sarcoidosis might not be. We also saw that allergies can show up in really strange ways, going way beyond a simple itch. And maybe the biggest lesson of all is that sometimes the most obvious clue, here the location of the lesions right on the piercings, is the most important one. It just reinforces how critical the patient's story is and how the right tests can finally crack the case. And that leaves us with one final thought. This case is a spectacular reminder of how complex the human body is and how it can react in ways that challenge our most obvious diagnoses. It really makes you wonder, what other secrets and surprising reactions is our body hiding, just waiting to be discovered? Thanks for watching this explainer.